Notable protests and social issues have risen in the past years, first South Africa, then the Netherlands, and now in France. Will the US be next? Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. My co-host and father is Brandon. If you enjoy the channel, take a moment and hit the like button. Throw a comment below if you have something to add, and while you're at it, subscribe. We'll have some sources down below if you want to check them out because today's going to be about the government and agriculture. We've got a lot of stuff involved with politics. I'm sure Dad will get angry because I'm already seeing the blood pressure physically rise in his face. But I've got some stuff that we've actually been thinking about talking about this topic for a while, and with the recent protests in France, I figured this would be a great opportunity to do just that. So I'm going to start with South Africa, moving to the Netherlands, France, and then we'll kind of finish with the US and some issues that have happened in the western part of the United States recently. And we'll move from there and just kind of talk about how that can impact farmers and ranchers. Mostly in our neck of the woods, it's the ranchers. So first off, South Africa, there was like about 2 years ago, around 2020, a lot of social unrest. It's still happening today with whether people realize it or not, but there was a forceful taking of lands from the government, or excuse me, forceful taking of lands by the government, and it was redistribution to a lot of the more indigenous peoples because there were a lot of white families and white owners of those lands, and they were either bought by the government or simply taken through estates and whatnot, and then reallocated to the indigenous peoples there. And there have actually been, if you think of the 1940s and 50s lynchings of deep South America, think of it in reverse. It's just black on white instead of white on black. And that's what has been happening. And it's a very real issue. And so I kind of wanted to start off with that. It's more violent than the other stuff that we will discuss later on. It's more socio economical and political, but this is more of a racial, really. It's a government backed racism to a large extent. And it's actually driven a lot of, if you look at some articles, a lot of South Africans to the American South, and they've been thriving as new American Southern farmers and ranchers. So that's kind of the opening with government and the agriculture, and what should its real role really be within it. So I'll kind of throw it over to Dad for some of his takes to that, and to start off with South Africa.
Well, I mean, it depends on what kind of a government you have. Do you have a uh, socialist type government? The Netherlands certainly is. South
Yeah,
Africa, they have a democratic means, I think, but I don't think they're like we are, where we have a constitutional republic quite
yeah, I
to the
think it's
same
mostly just
extent.
democratic across
Yeah,
the board.
which mob rules is essentially what that is. So, France, we know what a mess France is. And didn't I think we mentioned this before? I think wasn't the famous thing that Marie Antoinette said when told that the commoners were hungry,
Yeah,
didn't have any food, just let them eat cake. I mean, how detached can you become from reality? So you have to really look at, and this is my opinion, good, bad, whatever. Um, if you have no stake in your future and how you manage it, you're not really going to care whether you succeed or not. And that's the problem with uh, the types of governments that, and subsidies is one. I'm not for them. Don't care for them. Sometimes they're necessary to keep a business afloat. But anytime that you start getting the government into controlling how people can do what they do, which if they had the means to do it on their own, it's never as efficient. You show me
right.
one government program or one government uh, thing that they touch that becomes more efficient, less costly, and more productive. Was that a cricket I'm hearing? Yeah, certainly in my head, but here's the problem. Even in our constitutional republic, the free enterprise system is greatly affected by those who can control the government. Say our ag department. That's a huge, the USDA, Department
Yeah.
of Agriculture. Uh, when you have lobbyists that can control and they can say, oh, well, we'd like to have some of our treaties and our trade go here, here, and here, and it is not for the betterment of your citizens, that's a huge problem. Then do you really have a constitutional republic, or do you have a system by where it is more of a oligarchy, you could kind of say, but he who has the money or the influence wins.
Right.
Really, it's not even really a class system at that point.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too is, when you kind of dabble in a lot of things there, but when you talk about subsidy, not subsidy, the the thing with that is I agree with you that a lot of that came from the New Deal era
Yes.
too, which was the 1930s, early 1940s. And what people don't realize, if they look into the United States food development and the programs as we went from what Thomas Jefferson said as the yeoman farmer in the early 1800s to the early 1900s, 100 years later, and you start getting those monopolies with John D. Rockefeller and Carnegie and Morgan. They started looking at food as another issue because we were coming through the Dust Bowl, going into the Depression, and some of the reasons why there are market caps is to make sure that people don't starve, the producers don't starve.
Right.
As much as that sounds crazy, at the time, there were so many producers, they didn't want to overwhelm the market with production to the
Mhm.
point where everybody got pennies on the dollar for what they produced. So at that point, it was more worth them, yeah, more worth to them to kind of subsidize and bolster the payments to farmers and ranchers so that they would stay in business. Otherwise, there would be no production, and they were concerned that there would be a complete collapse of the Western world as we know it now. But
Yeah,
that's where it really started.
and I think that the thought behind that was that, look, these people have the infrastructure. If we need it, we can go ahead and put them into production. It's,
Right.
it's almost like uh, shelving a product that
Yeah.
you can just pull off and start using again. And it kind of works like that, but it kind of doesn't either.
Well, and what's crazy is they had the foresight to do that because fortunately that it went into overdrive during World War II and it
Yep.
helped the Allies win
Right.
because of the production of meat and grains to
Yep.
feed the soldiers, airmen, Marines, and sailors out there. But it's that thing that people go, well, why would you subsidize farming and ranching to begin with? That's why. Because if there's so many of us that are putting into a funneled system to begin with and we get nothing back, there's no point in being in business. That's the idea of capitalism. Eventually you're going to run out of money. There's no point in continuing. You have to move on to something different. And that's where a lot of it came from. So the real question, especially when we're looking at South Africa, is this government involvement with stuff like this, taking land and not subsidizing it, but maybe controlling it and forcing a certain movement of things. Is that what the government's role should be when it comes to agriculture and stuff like that? To me, the answer is no, but to South Africa, they say yes.
Well, and I think it's a completely different, it's a cultural thing there. And you're right. It's not about whether or not they can actually grow something or that they're producing a commodity. It's about a racial issue.
Yeah.
Uh, it's been
Everything I've
probably,
read has been racially driven.
yes,
The articles, regardless of where it's come from, has all explained that yes, it's redistribution to an extent. We see a lot of it like today with the United States of talking about reparations for people that had connections to slavery in the past and stuff like that. They are seeing it very much like that, but they're going much forward in essentially giving an opportunity to people to buy land for pennies on the dollar. So giving them the opportunity instead of paying $1 million for a farm or a ranch, it's like having them pay 10,000 and they get opportunity to try that. But then it's also turning around where it's encouraging those around them to also just take the land from those that
Right.
are already owning it too.
Well, but what's the difference between telling someone you have to sell your place and for pennies on the dollar, or even for fair market value and say you have to sell your place because we're going to give it to somebody else? Is that is that free market? No.
No.
It's a totalitarian type of move on a government's part. About probably 15 years ago now, I was working with a guy who went on, and there's a lot of people who do this, go on hunting trips. South Africa is a very hot spot place to do for exotic breeds.
Yeah.
And he went there, guided hunts, outfitted, and this was a family that had been there for I don't know how many generations themselves, white, and they had employees who were indigenous, and they treated them according to this guy, and I don't doubt this because he's not a guy that would be very uh, sympathetic to other races, religions, creeds. I mean, he's that kind of an individual, but it surprised him how these people who were farmers or had this game farm, very large tracts of land, were treating their employees. I mean, they treated them like
Slaves.
dirt. I mean, I mean, you wouldn't talk to someone, we wouldn't normally talk to
Yeah.
someone like that you have any kind of respect for, even if it was a stranger. And they were, I mean, very disparaging, racial slurs, the whole works towards them. And he asked me, he says, what's the deal? I mean, what's going on here? Is this normal? And they said, yeah. He said, look, we know what's going to happen. Um, Someday these people are going to revolt, and they may smile and nod their head and say, yes, sir, and to us. But he said, the minute it changes, they will cut our throats. They'll kill us standing right where we're at. And we know it, and they know it. If that isn't any more racial division,
Oh yeah.
I don't know what is. I mean,
That
what?
to me, that's a flashback to not even the 1940s and 50s, which I said earlier, but that's straight out slave era,
Yes.
1830s to 1850s.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. So to me, the government doing that is nothing more than a move because now you have a group of people who are more in power
Yeah.
or like-minded. It may not be all completely racial, but those that have the same mentality or the same social agenda that are forcing that to happen. Um, we'll see how it affects their agriculture. That'll be the bottom line. I don't
Yeah.
think it's agricultural driven at all. It's not free market by any means. I think it's completely cultural and racial. And when you put somebody in a job or to do something and you give them something and they have a bunch of tools at hand and they've never used those tools, how successful do you think they're going to be?
Well, and that's what they found. I read some articles yesterday as I was preparing for this was exactly that was uh the government did subsidize the sales of farms and ranches to indigenous people. So, like I said, you took $1 million ranch, the government would buy it for that from a white family or a white group or whatever. Then they would sell it for, I'm making very generic terms here, but like $10,000 to a black family or group or business or something to that. And some of those people that were receiving the land for the pennies on the dollar that I'm speaking of could not then produce on land that was appraised to be very productive because of that very reason. They don't have the tools, they don't have the knowledge, they don't have, and that may or may not be because of their fault whatsoever. But it's just the simple fact of what you're talking about of you're dropping somebody into a culture or an industry that they have very little knowledge about or no knowledge whatsoever, and you're expecting them to produce at the same rate that these other people that had the knowledge, the experience, the time, the energy, and the motivation to do so, and they're not coming up with the same results, and they're kind of throwing their hands in the air and going, well, why? Well,
Well,
to the
and
rest of
and
us it looks pretty evident as to why.
and that's not a racial issue.
Not at
That
all.
that is a, that is a knowledge issue, and
Yeah.
and some of it to a means is a cultural issue because people in agriculture work. They work a lot. So it isn't like you get a day off.
Yeah, it's not a nine
All
to
the time.
five. I wake up,
No,
have my coffee, get ready for the day, go out, and then when it hits 5 o'clock, there's a bell that says I can go home and I just
right,
leave.
right. and you forget everything that you've had to do that day and you walk
Yeah.
away and you pick it up the next day when you come. That's not the way it works in agriculture. So I don't care whether you're white, black, yellow, red, whatever color spectrums we're calling ourselves now. It's irrelevant. It's about skill and knowledge and desire. There is a ton of you got to want to do this and not just the skill. Because if you get all the skill in the world, you get all the knowledge in the world. If you don't want to work like this, you will fail because you won't do it. And that's what it takes to make it happen. So you can take someone from the city, I don't care what color you are,
Yeah.
doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. And you bring them and you give them all of the tools they have, just like I said before, they're going to fail. I don't care what color they are. That part's irrelevant. But it's based on racial means. So wait till they start having food shortages. Then what's going to
Well,
happen?
and
And I
that's
think you're leading into that probably.
well, that's 2 points though that I think you're hitting on the head. The motivation part, which is what again I alluded to earlier, South Africans are moving to southern United States and they're becoming successful. So that leads also to the second part. So the knowledge, the experience that you're talking about, it's transferable for sure. But the other thing is too, so that's a gain in a sense to the United States agriculture industry. The fact that we have a similar mindset or understanding from people in a different country coming and immigrating to us and bringing that with them, and they're doing well.
Mhm.
It not only helps our GDP, but it also helps production in general and food production and money production, knowledge production, all these things. And and also you can say even improvements in probably land appreciation and value and stuff like that. But then the other problem too is if you're having this knowledge and this experience and this desire and this motivation that's exporting from South Africa, what's that going to leave South Africa with in 10, 15 years? Are we going to see issues like we saw in the early 90s of like Somalia where you have food shortages because people don't know how to farm or because a government has come in and made certain sweeping changes that now have negated its production unintentionally probably, but will that occur anyway? Those are the questions that may end up causing further harm that people may not realize.
Well, and a government caused crisis is seldom solved with a government caused solution.
What?
Yeah, I mean, no, think about it. But one of the things I want to make sure I'm listening and hearing you correctly, as I think I am, is that when you say this, the knowledge and skill is transferable, you mean for that individual who has that skill and knowledge transferable to another place,
Yes.
not not transferable from here. I've been doing this all this time. I'm going to tell you how to do it. That's not transferable.
It's transferable with the individual, not transferable with the sale of a land.
Between individuals.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. No, that's right. I just wanted to clarify that the
Yeah.
transferability was there. Now we do have, even in our location, we've got a family that lives about 15 miles away from us, bought a farm. He's South African. I think she's local, and we've got neighbors just to the east of us, a couple of miles, about 4 miles, and he hires South African help. Our cousins have hired South African help. They know how to work, but they're also looking to get out of South Africa. And is that exactly what you're talking about? These are usually young men, don't have any ties, and are leaving their families behind to come here with an opportunity, and then maybe someday get their families to come with them.
I would
Uh,
love to talk to these individuals when I get home and have
yeah, yeah, I think
conversations
I
with them.
should just visit and talk to the one. I've visited with him before, but we haven't talked
Yeah.
about these things.
Yeah.
Uh, so it'd be, yeah, probably be worth our time to do that, just as a perspective.
Yeah. Absolutely. Moving on to the Netherlands, and I said that like I sounded like I had been drinking all day. Moving on to the Netherlands. There we go.
And why
Um,
would you move to the Netherlands? Would not.
I mean, have you been to the Netherlands? I have.
No, I have
The
not.
people are beautiful. I'm just gonna
Huh.
say that. The whole Baltic
Well,
region.
I know I'm not. So, I what's that? I'm not gonna get beautiful if I go visit.
That's true. That's
It
true.
doesn't work
But
like that. It's not transferable.
there you go. But it's moving on to the Netherlands, the same things happening. I believe it was last year. Let me try and pull up one of these things that I opened up. So what year is this? This was from actually November of 23. So this was just a couple months ago. And it says, just a quick blurb in here. Agriculture was responsible for 80% of emissions of one form of nitrogen pollution, and the result pointed out that the largest share was coming from dairy farming, which accounted for 1% of GDP. So moving forward, it enraged the farmers who, in many cases, were feeling mistreated. They had already been reducing their nitrogen emissions by almost two-thirds since 1990, mainly through technological advances. Over the same period, government services in rural areas had been cut in favor of investments in cities. And for more than half a century, government policies had encouraged farms to expand, saddling farmers with debt. Now they're being told to do the opposite. And quote, a lot had the feeling that the government betrayed them. So really, there's a couple things in here I wanted to kind of point out. They're saying agriculture was responsible for 80% of the emissions of nitrogen specifically. The point of this article was that the Netherlands government was looking to reduce emissions in general of things that would help increase climate temperatures, climate change. That's where much of this focus of today's conversation is coming from, believe it or not. Um, excuse me. Because of that, the farmers and ranchers, in this case, they just all refer to themselves as farmers. The farmers had worked over the course of 20, 30 years to reduce those emissions by two-thirds. That's impressive. And to me, again, it goes back to the other point that we've pointed out before, which is we continue to produce more with less year in and year out, not only in the United States, but in general, agriculture across the world continues to produce more with less. We are learning efficiencies. We are learning ways to make things stretch. We are making things where less people are required to do more. So it's just plain efficiency. But then at the same time, the government was trying to encourage development, investment in cities and taking away from the rural. So how are you supposed to do more with less when you continue to take more and more and more and more away? There's going to be a point where it's a tipping point, and that's where the farmers came in and they said, now you're expanding, you're telling us we need to expand and trying to, like I've said before, you leverage with investments and debt, but once it falls, that leverage will bankrupt you. And that's what they're looking at now. And that's where many of the farmers this past year came with the tractor parades and the clogging of the interstate systems over there because they felt the government had turned their back on them and said they were going to try and help them develop, but then turned around and took all that money and put it elsewhere. And so that's kind of where I wanted to pitch that to you was the climate change aspect and where the government comes in to play with dictating policy, but then not necessarily backing it up.
Well, I mean, there's a ton there too. Um, you've got the same kind of individual who is in favor of controlling climate change, and they've finally zeroed this in. When I was a kid, we were all going to freeze to death because we were coming into the next ice age because the
Yeah.
planet's cooling. I'm not kidding you. I mean, that was a big scare when I was a grade schooler. And then it's, oh, global warming. Oh, we can't do that. So but
Which started
when
with Al Gore.
the global warming, yeah, it kind of did. A big push or big awareness there. But here's the funny thing about this is when you call it one thing and all of a sudden there's no evidence that it happens, oh, you can't say you're wrong. Let's call it something that fills both of those niches. So climate change is real, and it is. You look outside every day and the climate changes.
As I
That
say, we've
is
never disagreed with climate change.
no.
Especially this year, we had a video come out with feeding, and you talked
All
about
right.
how El Nino impacted how late you were able to feed this
Yeah,
past year.
climate changes. So when you finally nail that down to you can say that anything I tell you is climate change. Now, what are the causes of it? Well, the causes of it for some of these people are the same ones that won't eat meat, won't eat or drink milk, no butter. Well, what is a producer of all of those? Well, it's cows, particularly dairy cows. Oh, well, dairy cows are also uh, treated cruelly and horribly, and they're locked up and they're not fed, and so they've got a really rich source of disinformation there. and not misinformation, because it's not about, that they made a mistake in what they're saying. They're intentionally disguising their agenda for, you know what, I don't think cows belong on the planet because you shouldn't eat meat, you shouldn't have all of these things, and they're treated badly, so we got to shut this down. Oh, by the way, they contribute to climate change. I mean, it's a very rich source of um, a causation of everything that they are looking to plant a flag in and stand on and try to conquer. So the dairy industry has been under attack for years and years. And you know what? If you're a dairy cow, I'll bet you the huge vast majority of operations, those are pretty content cows. Those are
Oh
pretty
yeah.
well taken care of cows. I mean, they even have shade over the top of them, and when it's hot, they got fans. When it's cool, they're able to stay inside, out of the elements. They've got, I mean, all of the luxuries that you could ask for, because what happens? They produce more. It's all
Yeah.
about, efficiency of what you're doing. So, um, that is I see the Netherlands as doing that, and causing, or pointing the finger at, that's the causation of it, when how many percent? Less than 1% of the population are dairy farmers. How much percent of the population, human and uh, cows, are there in the Netherlands? That's
Yeah, I
the
don't.
real question, because but they don't tell you that. That's the problem. And those numbers would be different. They would be a higher percentage because you're counting cows as people, which produce, all kinds of byproducts just like we do.
It says 1.6 million, but I don't know what that is. Percentage.
1.6 million cows
Well,
in the
I put
Netherlands.
dairy population.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah.
it says their dairy cows took up 41% in 2021.
Okay. But they reduced by how much? Two-thirds?
Two-thirds, yeah.
Hmm. Here's the other part of that just kills me. They're talking about CO2 emissions. What is it that plants need to grow and thrive?
Oh yeah, CO2.
CO2?
Yeah.
Huh? Huh.
So
So
I
there's a self-propagating model that if you get rid of all of the CO2 and you don't have as many plants,
yeah.
what's going to happen?
Well, then we wouldn't be around.
You don't think that? And that is a real thing by some of these really, really far out there people. They are so self-loathing that they think that all humans should be dead, including themselves, but they're not taking care of the problem on their own.
The big thing that
You know what I'm saying?
I just have an issue because I see kind of like an industrial theme. Um, the
Oh yeah.
the hog industry
Mhm.
before beef got into it really struggled with monopolization of the meat packers.
Mhm.
You know, they got funneled and funneled and funneled to a point where they had to scream from the rooftops that they had issues, and
Right.
it kind of got sorted out. The
I
beef
think they're still
industry,
working on it.
yeah, they're still working on it, but the beef industry has started to enter that portal. However, the beef industry has been more attacked from what you're talking about, the climate
Right.
change portion. And with that, it conveniently hits the dairy portion, which
Yes.
also dairy is unique to me because it overlaps, because it also goes with the egg and poultry,
Right.
because what they get classified as is they are the greenhouse emitters of nitrogen, carbon, all this stuff that supposedly warms our earth and harms us. Um, and I'm not going to disregard, or yeah, I'm not disregarding the facts about earthly temperature change. That's been shown over time. I'm just saying that this is not necessarily the primary reason for it, especially with such a low population in general. It's 41% in the Netherlands, but that does not necessarily mean that's true for the rest of the world.
Correct.
I don't have that off the top of my head. I'd have to look. But the big thing is beef is kind of going towards hogs, but then dairy is stuck with the beef in terms of monopolization, and simultaneously the dairy portion, because what you're talking about is not only the climate change with us also, but then also the issue with they often talk about welfare of animals because of the poultry being in cages and stuff like that. How are we obtaining our eggs? And then they say the same thing about uh, the milk and how it's acquired each day. And there, thankfully, there's been some great YouTubers out there showing the realities. Like, does this cow look unhappy to you? And this
Right.
cow comes up and just starts like rubbing against the brush, and they're like, "Oh, it feels so good." They
Yeah,
get
there's a
treats all
guy
day.
and I've seen him a number of times, and I'm sorry I don't know his name.
I think it's Iowa Dairy Farmer is what he goes by. He's got a
Okay.
stocking hat on most of the
Yes,
time. Yeah.
Beard.
Yep.
I loved it. I love listening to him because he nails it.
Yeah.
I've never seen him where he didn't have something that was absolutely applicable to what he's doing and counters exactly what he's being attacked with.
And he does it in such a respectful
Respectful.
way.
He's very respectful about it. Yes.
Yeah. He goes, I can see why you think this cow has an unhappy life, but let me show you. And he shows the brushes. He's
Yeah.
also got, technology that shows how they come through, they get treats. Some of them will go, they're smart enough, they'll go through the process, come right back into line and try and go through. And he goes, and this one is my favorite because she goes through 6 to 7 times a day, but she only gets treats twice because she has an RFID tag around her neck
Right.
that says when she can get her treats.
Right. Well, and he's marrying the the high tech end
Yep.
of things with a very low tech need. I
Yeah.
mean, we've been milking animals, whether they're goats, horses, cattle, for, you know,
Almonds.
almonds. Yeah, that's right. for for millennia. We literally have been using these animals and coexisting with them as a food source. Now he's taking the high tech to provide the efficiency behind it. When
Yeah.
a cow comes through and he can tell you how many pounds a day each one eats,
Right.
how much they drink, all of how much they rest, how many pounds of milk that they produce. I mean, this is all very high tech for efficiency, and that's exactly what we should be doing. We should be as efficient as we can be, uh, so that we get as much as we can, but not at the detriment of the animal or to the human.
And to your point, there's something I saw on TikTok about a month ago where somebody showed that they did the exact same thing for beef bulls. And they
Hmm.
said, we are trying to produce a bull that is Black Angus that develops muscle fast. And it does so more so it looks like it's just on steroids and it's producing more meat for the carcass weight once we go to butcher. And he showed kind of the process. They measured drinking, hay intake,
Hmm.
and they're trying to do a 100% grass-fed finished product too. So that's part of the reason because they're trying to get the muscling and everything without the grain. That's where their customer base wants it. So that's what they're pushing for.
Hmm.
And I put a comment in there. I said, "This looks interesting. I see you're a seed marketer essentially. They develop sires."
Yeah.
And I said, what's the overhead and what's the long-term approach? And they said, they replied back to me, thankfully, because I was actually very curious and they get a lot of comments. They said, it does cost a lot. We don't know what the outcome is yet because we are still in experimental phase. So they could lose their butts on
It could
this,
crash and burn because it's
but
not being
they
right.
are looking forward like you are talking about right there with the technology and trying to learn, become efficient and maximize again, doing more with less by using technology available to measure out and learn how to breed a certain way to get more muscling faster.
Well, and they're going beyond that. They're going down to the gamete level, really the DNA level
Yeah,
of, okay, what can we produce? Can we produce an animal that is a double muscled
right.
uh type of production and do it efficiently, quickly? Yeah, that's what that kind of efficiency is about. Not everybody will be up for that. I don't care. What you want, there's a market for it.
Right. But yeah, that's like moving moving back
But
to
but
like the
but you know what?
Netherlands.
Innovations like that, those people are pioneers in what they do,
Oh, I
and there
agree.
can be some innovation that comes out of that becomes a standard for everybody who has, say, a cow calf operation like we do.
Yeah.
We are the very grassroots. Literally, we're having cattle eating grass and selling those. That it doesn't get much simpler than that as far as the production portion. Because then we're not taking large numbers of those calves and then feeding them out and then trying to start to fine tune the mass production on that. We are because we're still choosing our genetics as well, but that can what they're doing can innovate everybody in enormous ways.
Yeah, and this ties back to the Netherlands because my question is, you've got individuals looking at maximizing while minimizing
Mhm.
and trying to do so in the most efficient way possible, both in time, energy, and labor, right? How how do you think the Netherlands is going to work out with this? Because they're telling their farmers to do more, and their farmers are doing more, but then they're not helping the farmers. But you're forcing people to do something without backing them financially or needs wise. How do you think that's going to turn out with them? And I asked
What's
that leaning towards what I'm going to ask later with France.
well, let me ask you this. What's the suicide rate on farmers in the Netherlands?
I don't know. I don't even want to. Let's
Because
see if
that's
I can
what'll
find
start
out.
happening for one.
Yeah.
I mean that because then that becomes a sociological type of issue. When you are squeezed into a corner and you've got nowhere to go, people lose hope and they blow their brains out. Not in the Netherlands because they can't get a hold of weapons, but they can certainly cry themselves to death, I guess.
Well, we've had this conversation before, though. I mean, look at the 70s and 80s for
Yes,
farmers and
yes,
ranchers in the
absolutely.
United States. It said in 2002 they had 10.8 suicides per 100,000. But that does not necessarily mean the farmers.
Okay. Yeah, those again, statistics are misleading. How was it 10 years ago compared to last year?
Yeah, and I'd have to go down a deep dark hole that I don't
Yeah.
know I
Yeah.
necessarily want to go down.
But it's something to ponder, right?
Yeah,
Because that's one of the first things that happens if you're gonna lose everything that you've ever had, and some of these they've got to be multi-generational places, because Europe is still very much with the apprenticeship type of uh, passing on, especially in their agriculture, not unlike what we are. But if you've been there and now you're the one that can't make it anymore, uh, being in despair will make you do um, final actions, suicide, all kinds of things will motivate that. Because what are you going to do? Now, what transferable skill do you have outside of that if you can't get out of there
right.
and you can't go somewhere and you can't afford, you can't start again? What happens to a 60-year-old guy who's told that he can't do what he can do because he doesn't have the ability or is not allowed to do what he does out of threat of jail or fines to the point where you can't move, you can't do it. What's a 60-year-old guy do? What's the average age of the American farmer rancher?
For American farmers or ranchers, I think it's high 40s, low 50s right now.
About 58, isn't it?
I was thinking 48, but yeah, we're in there somewhere.
I think you're closer to my age. I'm 60 years old now. And
Calculating it.
what do you do with most people who spent their entire life doing that? I haven't. I've got these skills as well, but I've also done other things. But guess what? Nobody wants to buy a 60-year-old guy to go work for them.
Dang it, you were right. 57 and a half.
Yeah.
It's
So
up from 50 in 1978.
yeah, that of course when I was a kid in 1978, everybody seemed old to us. 15 years old. But
Well,
I think what
well,
you're going to have is you're going to have exactly that. You have less production. You're going to have, for a different reason, the same exact thing that's going to happen in South Africa. You're going to have food shortages. And what's going to happen? When you do that, you're going to have civil unrest.
hold hold the question because I have an article for you that I think you might like. There's two of them together. This is moving into France though because I think it's important. And I can read the two articles because they're going to take less than 2 minutes apiece.
Okay.
France aims to bring 150,000 new farmers into the profession over the next 10 years to replace the many who will retire during that period while speeding up this sector's ecological transition. French agriculture minister, I'm not even going to say his name, announced on Sunday. With half of France's farmers due to retire in the next 10 years, Fresnu, I think, says he wants the number of new farmers joining the profession to grow exponentially. leading to your question. We need to attract more young people and also the not so young to ensure the renewal of generations, the minister said at a party in Cambrai. To make the sector more attractive, a communication campaign aimed at school children will be soon launched, along with new opportunities for apprenticeships to discover the agriculture professions and development of training. The aim is to increase the number of apprentices by 30% so that there are enough jobs to go around. To achieve these ambitions, the minister has pledged an additional 1 billion euros in 2024, a 15% increase in the budget, and 2.5 billion for 2025 and 2026. These funds will also enable us to support farmers in the environmental transition, which is what we talked about just a little bit ago, such as reducing pesticide use, decarbonizing the sector, and adapting to global warming. I would sum up this horizon as continuing to regain our sovereignty through our capacity for resilience and therefore our ability to support the great transitions underway. In a press release, Greenpeace regretted the absence of any commitment to the transition of livestock sector, although it is at the heart of the agri-food transition, which is extremely disappointing. The government is currently drafting a bill on the matter, blah, 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 blah. This was dated September 11th of 2023. Moving on to the newest one, which was dated the 28th of November, 2023. And this is titled In France, the Dung Riot Flares Up with Renewed Vigor. And it's probably a 100-word article. It says French farmers tried a similar measure a year ago. They brought bales of hay to large supermarkets and rolled them into the entrance to the store, blocking the road for visitors. Farmers were outraged by rising inflation and protested over rising prices for fuel and feed. This year, dung riots broke out in Toulouse. There, farmers doused the local administration building with liquid manure and dumped a bale of hay with garbage and manure in front of the entrance. They added car tires to the installation and set them afire. It is curious that the police made no arrests, and after the protest, the farmers returned to the farms and began to work. So these are the things that are happening in France right now. You're talking September was the first article,
Yeah,
and November, end of
November.
November, early December is the second article. And the things we talked about before, rising prices, reduction of the ability to obtain the supplies you need, and still expecting you to continue as if nothing has happened, and these people are losing their minds.
Well, but here's listen to that. Well, some of the words that jump out to me on that first article are they're going to recruit young people to
Yeah.
replace the retiring. Why are the older ones retiring? Right? I mean, you're not exactly a free market area in France. There
Yeah.
is, but it's largely controlled with government regulation,
I don't know how
just
their
like it is
welfare
here.
system works either. Do they have like a social security kind of system where they
Yeah,
retire at 68 or what is that? I don't know.
yeah, I think so. It isn't 68, it's quite a bit older than that. I think you're into like 72, something like that.
But
But
that's what I'm saying is, are
yeah,
they expected to go into that system and leave the agriculture system so that they can then put
right.
in the new generation?
But notice how the funding, 15 billion euros, that funding is tied also to less nitrogen use. There's so no pesticides,
Yeah,
no carbon.
1 billion for next year, and then
1 billion, sorry.
between 2025 and 2026, 2.5 billion, which is a 15% increase in the
Okay,
budget.
okay, that's where I got the difference. So sorry.
Yeah,
That's bad.
I
That
just
was
want to
my
make sure.
misinformation.
I just want to make
That
sure it
wasn't
was
on
good.
purpose. But the whole point of it is those are
Yeah,
government dollars got by how? Oh,
taxes.
taxation for the people.
Yeah,
And they are then given that money out with caveats. Okay, you will do it this way. And then they're doing a campaign to do what? Get into the grade schools and tell them to
yeah.
educate them. That's indoctrination. I mean, that's clear and simple. Okay, this is the way we do things, and you need to understand why. This is what we're doing for you. That these things never end well.
It Reading through, especially Netherlands and France together, um, it reminds me of what you've said before in conversations we've had on this forum, which is it leads more towards the government will eventually buy the land from you, the livestock from you, and then lease it back to you, or you will work it essentially for free and become governmental slaves. It's this keeps as I see this in Europe, and part of the reason why I wanted to say do this now at the beginning of the year of 2024 is because I saw something on Twitter where somebody said, I've always seen or I've noticed a trend where things like this happen in Europe and then we see them in a wave 3, 4, 5 years later. When will we see them in the United States? That was the question. I've seen it this way. When do you think we will see this here? And that's the thing here is like, when do you think we will start seeing the government roll around and start being more involved with agricultural production to the point where maybe your hypothesis and theory comes true, where the government starts to own the land, the livestock, the crops, and we work it?
Well, it isn't the question is not whether they'll do it. How do they go about getting it? And when
Yeah.
you say when they purchase it from you, do they purchase it from you like they did from the South Africans? Pennies on the dollar because you can't make it anyway. They force you to not be able to make a living on it or be able to uh, sustain your own operation in a free market area because they get the thumb on the scale and they get
Or
their toes on a scale.
or to the dung riots point, it gets to the point where inflation's so bad
Yes,
that you are in so much debt
yes,
that they will erase your debt and they
yes.
will revoke your land from you at the same time.
Yes, but they don't know how. But they'd be smart enough to know that they don't have people to do this. So what are you going to do? And I've said it before. You know what? Out of the kindness of our hearts, you've lived here a long time. We'll let you continue to live here, but you basically will work for the government to produce, and this is what you're going to produce and how you're going to do it. Still tell you how. How much then? And this is where I come back from the very beginning of this conversation. When you have no personal skin in the game in a free market type of enterprise, how efficient, how productive will you really be when it doesn't matter?
That's a great question.
Ask those questions that are of people in countries socialist and communist type countries. Why do they have very low production and they just barely get by? They have old equipment, they have hold together stuff because they don't care. It's not free market, it's government controlled. That never
Well,
works out well because you don't have any personal gain in it.
the other problem too is, let's say just out of sheer pride because you were raised right, you're going to do it anyway with integrity and you're going to try your best every year, right? The other question I have is, what happens when you have a good year and you set the standard? Like, hey, this is the yield per acreage I can create, or this is the poundage per calf I can produce. And then you flip it and suddenly you hit a drought. You are expected to create that yield per acreage or that poundage per calf, and you can't make it. You physically, no matter what you do, you cannot do that. Then what's the repercussions for that?
There you go.
Those
Then,
those are my questions
yes,
also.
right. What if you don't produce? What happens?
Yeah,
Are you
I
going to be
don't know.
replaced? Probably. If you're lucky, you'll just be replaced. Where will you go? What will you do? And how will you support yourself?
Well, and
The
that's the
government
thing,
doesn't
right?
need you anymore.
That's what I see right now is I see France and the Netherlands losing their minds, and they have been for the last year.
Yeah.
But I don't know what's going to happen because the government clearly hasn't done anything. This has been occurring. It hasn't been like overnight. This just occurred. Like it's been going on for a while.
Right.
I just don't know what's the repercussions. Nobody's seen the repercussions yet. And I don't know what the answer will be yet either, other than to have, maybe help the farmers out. But at the same time, knowing those cultures too, I'm not saying just give them free handouts because they're famous for just taking stuff and running with it too. So
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's what happens in a socialist type. You don't have to. You get free
Yeah,
stuff and there's nothing that gives you any desire or any accountability for it. What are you going to do?
right. Well, moving on, we're gonna go to the United States now. And the the thing is with the Netherlands and France, it was mostly centered upon regulations, increased regulations, which therefore increased restrictions on
Mhm.
things, and it made things difficult for the farmers. Now in the US, I'll start with a broad scope approach and look at something a little more local to us. The Secretary of Agriculture, Secretary Vilsack, was in Dubai in early December. And in Dubai, he essentially came up with a pledge for climate leadership within agriculture for the United States. What did you say? We're looking at climate now, right? Three big bullets that he had in this article that I read that is on the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture website, came from that website and said he pledges nearly $20 billion to help producers implement practices and projects that reduce emissions, enhance soil carbon sequestration, and provide other climate benefits. I don't know what those climate benefits are. I'd love to know. The second one, more than $13 billion will be provided to rural America with clean, affordable energy and increase the availability of domestic biofuels. Okay. And then $5 billion. So if you're counting, this is if they're all separate, not assuming they're all in one bill, that's $38 billion. So this one, 5 billion to maximize the power of public and private forests in the fight against climate change. I can help you with the forest thing. How about you let them burn? That's one.
How about you selectively cut and use those renewable resources for
Almost all
one,
that,
because they
but
will burn less. You won't have to do that.
that's
More
that.
grasses will grow and create more. Oh, we don't want to do that though, because they need CO2 for that. Yeah, never mind.
But those are the big ones that he said. And it led to the climate theme, so that's why I wanted to throw that out there. Um,
Oh, it's
bef
here. It's alive and well.
Yeah, I'll throw it to you for a second before we kind of move on to the next part. So I'll just go with it. What do you have to say about that?
Well, I mean, they're just more uh, sneaky about it in a way because what they're doing is not only forcing the U.S. producers into being more and more efficient, and they're not helping them out, but we're subsidizing other countries.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, we're using a lot of technology that comes from other countries and influxing it into our country without using our labor,
Right.
our skilled persons. Yeah, no, I get it. That's a good point too. I didn't think about that. Yeah. All right.
Enough said about that.
Yeah. Uh, the other thing, our geriatric Congress finally came together and made a decision. It was 45 days, actually 47 days after they were supposed to, and that was they made a continuing resolution that resulted in a annual budget, which it's your whole job to do a budget, but whatever. Here we are. Um, I get so peeved about this, and it's not even funny. They finally part of it was the farm bill. The farm bill's been around. This particular farm bill has been around since not 19, sorry, 2018. So it's been around for 5 years. It'll continue through, and I think 2023 is the or this next fiscal year 2024 I believe is the last year, and then they're supposed to create a new one. I doubt they will. They'll probably just keep adding to it because they won't come up with solutions. But they finally passed it, and there's things in the farm bill that people maybe be like, well, what's in there? Disaster assistance, dairy margin coverage, farm loans, emergency loans, farm safety nets, dairy programs, and those are just overall concepts that help with the things we talked about, subsidies, helping make up for the coverage of dairy or trying to reduce costs in the grocery stores for people. That's kind of what it is. It also helps with SNAP and things like what people would understand as welfare, right? It used to be known as food stamps. It's now SNAP or Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, and it's given to families in need for low income individuals to help get the foods that they need to help take care of themselves or their kids. And it's done on an EBT card or an electronic benefits transfer card. I don't have an issue with stamp or with SNAP unless if it's used correctly, right? Just like anything else. The question here, though, this is kind of what I wanted to bring out. The bill was signed and I looked up this graphic, and I will pop this graphic up, and I need to look at it real quick as I pull it up real quick because it's going to be edited in, and Dad won't be able to see it, unfortunately. But it has three-quarters of it is for SNAP in this farm bill.
I was going to say 80%. I was going to,
It's th-
yeah, but
it's
okay.
three-quarters. So the total is $428 billion is in the farm bill alone. Farm bill. And I was curious, I've always heard there's so much welfare in the farm bill, so on and so forth. I was like, okay, let's take a look. I typed in welfare in the farm bill. It doesn't say there's welfare in the farm bill. That's totally different stuff. That's like under human resource directives, whatever, all that. But SNAP, because it results directly in the nutrition assistance stuff, going to the grocery store, the food stamps, what people are most familiar with, that's in here. I will go from lowest and go to the biggest. So 1% is the other. It includes miscellaneous horticulture, forestry, rural development, credit, research, and then it says everything else. Okay, that's $4.2 billion. That's 1%. Next one is 7% with conservation. And all it says is CSP, Conservation Stewardship Program. Okay. Now we're going to go to the next one. Oh, by the way, that's 29.6 billion. The next one is also 7% or $29.6 billion. And this is commodities. For example, your whole farm revenue protection program, in parentheses, it just says whole farm. Next, this is the last one before we get to SNAP, is 9%. It's crop insurance at $38.5 billion. And it's for price loss coverage programs. Okay. And that makes sense. Drought, hail, a tornado comes through your land. That's what you get. Here we are, the big one. 76% or $325.8 billion is nutrition for SNAP. And that's it. Just SNAP is what it says. You're talking $428 billion to help with agriculture. And out of the 428, 325 is for food stamps. And that's where I started looking at this and I went, that's a problem. I
Mhm.
I I have no problem with the subsidies that we were talking about, to an extent because they're trying to keep it from flooding the market. Crop insurance, there's just things you can't do. Some regions will overproduce and others will underproduce because of how El Nino hits or La Nina or a tornado. But when 76% of the entire farm bill from 2019 to 2023 shows that, I was like, wow. Again, it'll be up so people can see it, but
That's a see, there's the problem. It's always been that way. That
yeah, and that shouldn't
welfare,
be.
well, welfare has been hidden in to the Farm Bill in the Department of Agriculture, and it's a very horrible sales, or maybe it's a really good sales by those who are doing it because they think freaking farmers and ranchers, look at the money they get. We're
Yeah.
subsidizing them, and it's not. It's not at all. There's a
Not
very
when it's
small amount.
76% of the farm bill, it's not. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
It I would agree with you if it was all of us and I was like,
Oh
man, look at
yeah.
that money. And I'd be like, let's compare that to other big bills, defense bill. Then I'd say let's look at the welfare allocations and stuff like that. But you can't honestly look at that and say that for sure.
No.
Like there's no way.
No.
Yeah. All right. Gonna step off my high horse there, unless you had
Again,
anything else to add.
again, this has been happening for a long time. When Vilsack goes to Dubai and promises all these things, this is just more of the same. You're boiling the frog slower than they do. We tend to be less sheepish than they are in Europe. We tend to be more, and that's why we don't organize farms and ranches to the point because we're all independent thinkers,
Well, there's a
and
couple
we
things to
have
that
to be.
though. Part of it's part of it's I think we're just not as connected because we're so much more spread out
True,
geographically speaking.
that's
The other
true.
thing, the other thing too is we may not be sheepish, but I think we do tend to put our heads in the sand more so than the Europe, and that's because we are more rural and all we have to do is just not turn on the TV. And if we don't talk to our neighbors in a week, then we don't know any better. You know what
Okay,
I
yeah, I
mean?
see how what you mean there. All right, yeah, I buy that because I'm guilty of that as well. I'm
No, I that's
completely
why I'm pointing it out.
content to never see another human for weeks on end.
And you know what that's done? That has done nothing. And this
Made
is
me
100.
happy.
No, well, yeah, for the short term, but you know what
Right.
it's done?
Exactly. No, that's exactly right.
It's emboldened people like the NCBA,
Yeah.
people like PETA.
To take
And if you
advantage.
don't think NCBA and PETA are not on the same side, you're wrong. It's emboldened organizations that have the determination and the desire to be involved daily with politics and current events.
Hmm.
The rest of us just don't want to deal with, and we want to deal with our own piece of the world. And it slowly dissolved our ability to do that. And that's where I come up with the issues.
And here's the horrible part. Some of them are funded by us in a non-voluntary way.
Yeah, I saw somebody put on Twitter today, actually, non-cattleman backed association. And he had a whole blurb that essentially said F you to them. So I was like, you know what? I can get behind that tweet. That's
Buy
a
that man a beer.
yeah, yeah. But there, it's just that's what I'm saying though, is they may be more involved and they may be sheepish to an extent, but we are also equally
Yeah,
bad about it because we stick our heads in the sand and we say it's not my problem right now, and we just
right.
kick it off to the next generation and the next generation until
Well, and
eventually it's going to be
yeah,
on the next generation's doorstep.
and here's what I do want to do, and that is I want to build calves, I want to make horses, I want to give a good product, and I want to be left the hell alone.
Yeah,
And I want to be able to pass this on to other generations. And so you like, let me do what I do best, leave me alone.
yeah,
And so you self-isolate. And you're absolutely right. Absolutely right.
yeah. Well, I got your right from dad, so I'm going to take that and go on to the next one. Um, the next thing is the last thing, and that's the most um the most impactful cannonball into the pool, so to speak, in our region recently, and it's coming out of Colorado. We had in mid-December some wolves released into Colorado. Now, people might be, well, you guys have had wolves over there for a while. You know what? You're absolutely right. And that's what the problem is. These guys have actually had. All right, let's step back for a second. When did the wolves get originally released in the greater Yellowstone region in Montana and Wyoming?
Oh God, 84, 85,
Okay, 8045. We had
somewhere.
problems for more or less 20 years trying to
Oh yeah.
figure out how to deal with depredation, hunting wolves, all this stuff. Legislation between the United States legislation, the Montana legislation, the Wyoming legislation, because there's a national park involved,
Right.
there's
Idaho
interstate
as well.
boundaries, there's
Yep.
Idaho, I'm not going to count because they don't count. Uh, Montana, Wyoming, for the most part, had the issue though. Wyoming, yes, I'll recognize Idaho for a second, but they are their own world to an extent. But they fought with this issue for 20 years. They finally came up with a solution that everybody was not happy, but there was a compromise, and that was a quota hunt. Everybody could go out, buy a wolf tag for the hunting season, and when they reported a certain number of wolves harvested for the year, they shut it down.
Mhm.
I think the original years were like 30 wolves, which did nothing. But then the other thing is people are like, oh, hunters have the depredation tags they can get from the wildlife and the fish and wildlife parks. Yeah, but the red tape you have to go through and the ways in which you have to truly prove that it's a wolf being a
Right.
predator to your herd is so difficult to do that it's not just a hey, they're getting my herd, I need a tag. It's not that easy.
When it's reactive, not proactive, because you
Right,
have to wait for it to kill something or be
right.
in the act of killing something. It's too late.
Then there's the other argument of the wolves are natural, they're in the region. Yeah, to an extent, if you're in the Yukon territories, the Northwest Territory, and
Canada.
Alaska,
Yeah.
these are not prairie wolves, these are gray wolves, and they were reintroduced to a region that they were not originally
Right.
native to. So that created its own other issue. Now we fast forward to now, okay? We're talking 30, 40 years after the fact of the original reintroduction. Colorado has just formally introduced wolves into its wildlife areas. And there are people on I'll say the political left that are applauding it and they're excited for it because this is reintroducing a wolf, a long known predator, to return back to where it needs to be. Again, it was not ever naturally in this area. But we'll negate that fact. The problem is, and the issue I see, especially as a producer is that we had this problem for, again, the last 30, 40 years in Montana and Wyoming. And it's like Colorado didn't learn their lesson. They didn't watch north a state or two and see what happened and go, how can we do this better? Especially when it's been reported that two significant size packs are already in the northern borders of Colorado that naturally migrated from Yellowstone and Teton National Parks down to Colorado. So the question is, why'd you do that? Is it symbolic because you know that you have your packs there, or are you just trying to are you trying to like step out into the limelight and show yourself and get some 15 minutes of fame? What is
Yes.
it? But either way, as a producer, I completely disagree with it because you're about to create a problem that you are gonna find you're gonna have to fight through for the next 5 to 10 years before you come up with a viable solution.
Well, here's the issue there. Those that are doing it don't have any consequences to what they're doing. They don't raise any animals. They're
Yeah,
the ones that are doing it. And your question is why didn't they learn from what's gone on with us for the last 40 years is when you want something, regardless of whether it's good for you or not, you're not going to look at the facts and let them confuse you. You're going
that's
to
true.
do what you're going to do anyway because it's what you want to do. And when you have a small win like that, that is all the bigger reason to pound your chest and say, look what we did. We won.
Yeah. No, I agree. It's just
That's how they
um
operate.
we're talking government and agriculture today. And this was one that I wanted it's angering and I wanted to finish with it because we just talked about the spending and the ridiculousness and in which we're funding things in the United States, but then we also go and do things like this that have real impacts on real people, on real livestock. And it's like to your point, just because we want to win in the debate column, we're not taking into account what this can have on an
Right.
impact on people. This is talking about livestock, sheep, cattle. That's what I'm really focused on. But then you take also other things like croplands with nitrogen in terms of fertilizer and stuff like that. Like, what are the impacts of governmental regulations on the ability to produce for the producers?
Well, here's something you got to look at too. Those people that are hugging the wolves, I assume they like all creatures. So
Yeah.
what's going to happen with Colorado's elk and deer
And
populations
and
and moose,
Colorado's, you know where
and
Colorado gets most of their hunting tourism for? Elk.
elk?
And you
They
know
have
what's going to go away?
phenomenal elk hunting in Colorado.
You know what's going to go
Goodbye.
away?
Goodbye. See, and here's what's happened. You take a government program or a government edict, which is what, if you want to look at it, that's really what the Endangered Species Act was. It was a
Yeah.
government saying, nope, this is what you're going to do. Had some great things happen.
The
Um,
Grizzlies came back.
bald eagles, a lot of
Bald
lot of
eagles came back.
raptors, a lot of raptors, a lot of birds.
Yeah.
Um, had some really good things that happened with that. Now, when you use the government program for an agenda like they do with these wolves and call these are endangered species being reintroduced, that doesn't quite matter what the facts are. But now you're going to use that Endangered Species Act as a weapon, a government weapon, and that's a heavy hammer. And they do it and they're successful at it. It's hard to undo that.
Yeah.
The greater Yellowstone Valley uh, and area for grizzly bear habitat is overpopulated by a lot. And I know one of the guys who is an absolute expert in bears, and he was with the Fish and Game Department for an entire career in Alaska. Very, very good at what he does. Politically, he and I don't agree. We have great debates all the time, but he knows what he's talking about, and he's an
Yeah.
expert in it. He took a paper, a research paper that he did, or a paper based on the population, the Greater Yellowstone Valley bear populations, and they nearly ran him out of the room because he said they were overpopulated and need to be managed.
Yeah.
That's all he said.
And he's
And
not
he's
saying
got the
extinct
facts.
them. He's
He's
saying,
got everything to prove it and just show it. And we're seeing it anecdotally. We're having grizzly bears show up here that haven't been here since Lewis and Clark
right.
shortly after they were here.
And that's the point is he's not asking to make them extinct again
No,
or come to the brink of extinction. He's
no,
saying manage them.
right.
Just like we've ranchers and farmers, they recognize they lost the debate with the wolves when they were released in the 80s, 90s. They said, all right, got it. We lost the bet. But what we are asking for is a responsible management of these packs because they can make litters multiple times a year and they exponentially increase quickly if they have the food.
And the
Now,
more they eat, the more they reproduce.
right. And you take away the livestock, which again, Colorado, you're about to see what happens to your wildlife. Take away the wildlife, then they're going to move on to the domestically produced livestock with sheep and beef and all that. But the same thing like with the bears. I think it's one of the coolest things, honestly. It's a pain in the butt right now, but it's one of the coolest things to see that the Grizzlies are returning back to where they were in the early 1800s. They were known to be in the North Dakota, South Dakota,
Mhm.
Wyoming regions, and Nebraska
Even
because
Nebraska, yeah.
they went that far
Hmm.
because they had such big populations, and now we're returning to it. I think that's cool, but at the same time, there's repercussions for that. You're gonna
Right.
have to accept those repercussions. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's gonna be a it's gonna be some trying times, man. I know we have wolves that come through the ranch area on occasion. Have you seen grizzly in the area yet?
No, but we got two different grizzlies in the Snowy Mountains that are the base of them are about 25 miles north of us.
Okay.
That's close.
Yeah.
One of them, they didn't know what it was. It was 2 years ago. Um, Cows were dying. Had a couple of dead cows, and found that it was a grizzly, big grizzly that took him down. They moved the grizzly. Or then they euthanized it. I think it was getting a little aggressive, and then they had another one sighted in there last year.
Yeah.
The
See, and to
Snowies are a
me,
small mountain range. They're really
and
not that big.
and to me, that would be a great opportunity for somebody such as us to take a bear tag and see if we could get them in the fall time. That
Mhm.
no reason for not doing that, but
Right.
because of like you're saying agendas, they've been on the endangered list. I don't know if they're gonna come off. I really don't.
I doubt it.
Too
I
much
really do.
sentimentality, and it's our state animal too. That's the other problem.
Well, you have to have a politician's kid get eaten before it's gonna by a grizzly before it'll get changed.
Yeah, that's true. Well, that's government and ag, and that makes sense. So there we go. So that's kind of our thought. Regulations, restrictions, increased prices, lack of viable
Subsidies.
solutions to a lot of things. So
Yeah.
with that, I'll hand it to you for the closing
Well,
comments.
and normally I like to tell everybody we thank them till they're better paid, and we do. I don't know whether I should say we'll subsidize you someday, but we'll call it that.